So now that we're going to do a little bit of a analysis of what we've done up to this stage. And here you can see flipping back through the different layers. And here's the wireframe, very first wireframe we started from. And I'm going to redraw the figure at the head. So, I have this midline and this sort of vertical and horizontal midline. And what that does is it helps me determine the direction of the face. Which way are they looking? And I think you can see just from that little bit, these three lines, basically the oval, the center vertical line, and the center horizontal line, which direction the face is. And that becomes a scaffold to put on the rest of the features, because the nose is basically on that center vertical line, the eyes are on that center horizontal line, the mouth is below the nose, and then the rest of the head fills out. The ears are also, depending on the angle, on that center line also. Now, I don't particularly use any specific formula consciously when I draw heads and faces, but I think if you analyze it, you can see that there is a sort of method to drawing. Like when I draw, I just sort of draw. I don't really think about it too much. But there's definitely the two midlines, and then the eyes on the horizontal. And there's a little triangle that goes down to the nose. And then below that's the mouth. Then a little outside of that, connected to the mouth, is the sort of the jaw and the cheeks. You have a little area of the forehead, and you add the ears. It's good to have some sort of method to draw heads, especially in 3D space, so you can kind of turn the head around. And here I'm showing the heights. This is a way to measure sort of proportions of the figure, proportions of the heads. This is a figure is about 6 heads high. I think typically superheroes are like 7 or 8 heads, a little bit taller. Fashion figures, it can be like 9 or 10 or more heads tall. 6 is it's almost cartoonish. I think it's maybe somewhat close to reality. And then you notice that the hips and the legs are about at the middle point, 3 heads up from the bottom. And now we're going to look at the original rough sketch, which is probably my favorite part of the process. And I'm going to sort of recreate that. And there's no real tricks to this. I mean, I guess you could follow the sort of construction I made. I've studied various ways to construct heads. There's, every artist has their own sort of way to construct heads. Generally, proportions are the same no matter what, because we're all working from reality. And human heads are somewhat, proportionally the same. And here I'm showing the the forms of the body. I like to draw these big ovals. Some people use more geometric shapes like lines and squares and blocks. For me, I like these ovals. I used to study computer graphics in college, and I really like using splines as opposed to polygons. I think I did a lot of work with splines, and that really influenced my work or influenced my drawing. And that's, another way the rest of your life influences your artwork. So I draw these, these big spheres and cylinders that connect to each other. It's important to simplify forms so you can put them down quicker. And then you can go in and add realistic detail later. But yeah, I just have, these big clumps of spheres that represent sort of muscle groups. I have these two big spheres of the pectorals and then the rib cage, abdominals, obliques. And I just sort of build up the figure that way. I think it's also good to look at toys and models. And figure drawing is really important too. The thing with figure drawing is you get a really good sense of reality, of how a real figure moves, and how weight is distributed. The only problem with that is you don't always get a sense of the underlying structure. That was a difference between the Northern Renaissance and the Southern Renaissance, is that the Southern Renaissance, they were really concerned with the underlying structure and form, whereas the Northern Renaissance was very concerned with outward appearances. And both are valid approaches. For me, it's important to understand underlying structure because I work a lot from my imagination. So I want to be able to create forms and move them around in space from my imagination, as opposed to necessarily having to work from reference. And you can see how I compose a hand. I construct a hand with all these little beans, these little ovals and spheres, shapes. Each little like bean is sort of like one little joint, one little section of the hand. You have the phalange broken up into the three parts, and each phalange is a different little bean. And that's basically how I make up the whole figure for the most part. These little shaped beans and cylinders. Cylinders are kind of like the bones. And then as you get more familiar with the figure, through study and practice, you'll start to, add little nuances to these beans, add little differences in shapes to get them a little more realistic or even stylized. And this again is all drawn in real time. So I'm just, putting down these shapes. But I know that they're supposed to represent muscles. Here I'm drawing the bones underneath muscles on this arm. And all this stuff gets reflected in your drawing, even if you don't draw it, you know. I'm not necessarily drawing the bones when I draw the figure, but the knowledge of the bones helps me understand how to draw the figure. And it's all very sort of subconscious or instinctual. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of knowledge and studying that goes into your drawing. Even when you're being loose with it, all the stuff you've learned in the past is going to reflect in your drawing. Just like all this practice you've done in any sport is going to reflect when it's game time. I like sports analogies. I like sports analogies because, drawing is it's a very physical act. There's a lot of sort of muscle memory, instinctive things that go into drawing and painting. You can calculate, you can be deliberate, and there's a lot of artists that work in that way. But a lot of it is sort of like it's like a performance. You're out there just playing, you're out just doing it. It's just your hands are just doing their thing. And here I'm drawing the legs. Again, this is all based on knowledge of the structure and anatomy of the legs. Draw these ovals to represent different parts of the anatomy. And this is the underlying bones in the leg. We have the big femur. Then we have the kneecap, which kind of goes in the middle of the femur and the tibia. The tibia branches off inside, and we have the fibula on the outside. Then you have the metatarsals for the feet, or the tarsals and metatarsals for the feet. And then we have the muscles of the hips. And keep in mind that these are also rotated slightly. The one leg is a little bit to the front. The other leg is a little bit to the side because the whole figure is also rotated a little bit to the side. Basically like a 3/4. And you'll notice that the arm structure is very similar to the leg structure. They're kind of divided to two sections. Now I'm drawing the sort of armor details, this little shape here that creates a lot of rhythm and becomes a motif in his armor that I repeat in a lot of different places. It's almost, I don't know, 10 times at least. And you don't have to do that. You can make it sort of like a big jumble if you want. You can make it very minimal if you want. Just have one shape, repeat a couple times. You can have it repeat a lot of times. In this case, it helps add rhythm and unity to the figure. Now I'm working on the exact segmentation and showing how the armor is built. And this is all behind the scenes what I'm thinking when I'm actually drawing it. And this comes from, I mean, it's a little bit improvisation on the armor because I don't think I've drawn this exact armor before, but I've definitely drawn armor similar to this before. So it's, you're building on what you've done before. And like I said, and I'm going to emphasize is, draw what you like, draw what you're familiar with, you know, add to that repertoire, but don't be afraid to just keep drawing the same thing, You're going to get better and you're going to add variations of it, and you're going to sort of develop your style and personality based on what you like to draw. So don't be afraid to keep repeating to hundreds, thousands of times. Just keep doing it if you want to. Change if you want to. But it's okay. It's okay to keep drawing what you like drawing. And keep learning about it too. I study a lot of real armor, and I think it helps me when I draw my imaginary armor. Now I'm going to do a study of the helmet. Something to consider when you're doing these character designs is what is the ultimate use of this. A lot of it could be just art, right? You're making these characters just to exist as art, as either original drawings or as original digital art that you can make into prints, or just pictures that you like, you want to share on Instagram, whatever you want. I've sold a lot of artwork, just original character design, character drawings before, and I've exhibited original character art before, and I like doing that. It's a very creative thing to do. You can also do character designs for comic books or video games. I like to make my own comics, and I will often use characters I drew for those comics. Sometimes I make video games. You can design new characters for video games or use existing characters that you've drawn before. It's like you're creating a sort of cast that you can sort of reuse and bring back and forth, similar to like actors in Hollywood. You'll see a lot of actors show up in a lot of the same works by directors. A director will use the same actor over and over again, and may even use similar characters over and over again or variations. So as an artist or as a character artist, you can kind of think in the same way too. You can create a stable of characters that you can use in different projects.